So the herbs actually make the chemotherapy more effective.
Okay.
So you can reduce the dose of chemotherapy. That means there's less harm to the patient. They still get the same effect. Plus, the herbs themselves can strengthen the body's system. For instance, when you have chemotherapy, your white blood cells, red blood cells plummet. But if you actually have the appropriate herbs, it actually brings the white blood cells and red blood cells up and maintains the strength of the patient. So the patient has a much easier time. For instance, if in China you have an operation and you have acupuncture anesthesia, then after the operation you don't have the post-op fatigue and sickness that you get with anesthesia. Now, acupuncture anesthesia only works on 80% of the population. There's 20% where it's useless. So you can't use acupuncture anesthesia for everybody. But of course, they always test to make sure who can have it and who can't before they do the operation. But those who elect to have acupuncture, they heal up much more quickly, because although general anesthetic is an amazing, you can't do without it, it is a poison. You do poison the person.
And
so
the
obviously
body has
they need
to
a
deal with
recovery
that,
time.
yeah.
So if you can actually do it without using, obviously, here they like to do local anesthetic wherever possible, because it doesn't affect the body so badly. But if you can actually use acupuncture anesthesia instead, even better.
Right. So you visited China a few times and you learnt from your experiences there, lots of practical experience, and you were gradually incorporating that, presumably, in a practice in England.
Yes, yeah. I mean, you do your 5 years here, which includes Western medicine, which is vital, part of your education. But then you have various specialities, interests. And you can take that further. A lot of people don't, but you can take it further and then go to different hospitals in China and study with various professors in various particular areas, like autoimmune and allergies was one of my main interests, but also working with dermatology is another interest, and respiratory conditions and gynecology. They're sort of the main conditions that we treat over here anyway. So that sort of partly dictates what your interest is, the number of people who need your help in particular areas.
So Ken, we've had some background about how you got to the stage you are now with your practice in England with using acupuncture and Chinese herbs. Why do we need Chinese herbs? What's wrong with British herbs?
There's nothing wrong. Chinese medicine is an unbroken system. It's prehistoric, i.e. it was an oral tradition before they started to write down the practice of Chinese medicine. So it's an unbroken tradition as far as writings, 2,500 years. It's the herbal industry itself, the ability to grow herbs, to know where to grow them, how to cultivate them, when to harvest them, how to then process the herbs, etc. Again, is 2,500 years old. It's an unbroken tradition. Therefore, we use formulas that have been used for 2,000 years. There's so much clinical evidence and observation based on how those formulas work. And they use precise herbs. And they will use herbs that are from a certain district of China as well. So they won't accept any other herbs from grown anywhere else. It's very exact science. With herbs in Britain, it is actually a worthy discipline, and again, practice of Western herbal medicine is something that I would like to put time aside to study, maybe incorporate into my practice. In terms of comparison, though, in Western herbal medicine, it is a broken tradition. They sort of lost their way, in the sense that if you look at medieval herbalism, it was an increasing tradition that sort of worked on similar, if less sophisticated lines that Chinese medicine ran on. Then came the Renaissance and science, and the birth of science. And Western medicine moved more into the realms of symptomatic medicine, as opposed to holistic medicine. Indeed, as we see in our allopathic pharmaceutical medicine, is principally based on symptomatic medicine. Allopathy, allo means to oppose a symptom, for instance. Where China's, the history still maintains a practice of holistic medicine. Number two, people probably don't realize, but a third of our shrubs in Europe come from China.
Really?
One third. The flora and fauna in China is immense, and the microclimates in China cover the full spectrum. And the Chinese herbal industry is huge, and the farmers have been doing it for generations. I would say, why not use Chinese herbal medicine?
Right. So when someone comes to you with a problem, you use acupuncture. You use your first diagnosis is feeling the pulses.
No, first diagnosis is how they enter the room.
Really?
Yes. Do they creep into the room quietly?
Really?
Do they burst into the room? Do they sit right up close to you, or do they sit further away? Do they speak with a very loud voice or very quiet voice? How they smell? Do they smell salty or pungent, or the color of their face? Everything they do. And if they're saying that a tragedy just befell them last week, it was terrible, in a laughing voice, it's inappropriate. So you're looking for every single sign. I can't remember his name, but centuries ago, a Chinese physician said to only treat the person by taking the pulse is like looking at the sky through a telescope. You miss out a lot of information. So it's right from when the person enters the room. Dialogue is very important, speaking to people, finding out their past history as well. If you're going to give people Chinese herbal medicine, you want to know what illnesses they've had in the past. That affects their constitution, but it may also affect their ability to receive herbs. If they've had for instance, if they've had jaundice and hepatitis in the past, then you want to be more careful with their liver. And so once you know that, it's not a problem. If they have digestive problems, you need to know that if they've had bouts of diarrhea from certain foods in the past, you need to know that, even though they're fine now. They don't have a problem now. Because there's still a sensitivity potentially there, so there's certain herbs, again, that you wouldn't use. So basically you gather as much information, and you gather information about their father, their mother, their brother, their sisters, what illnesses they had as well. So you make up an immense file of information. And yes, then we take the pulse, and we look at the tongue, and we look at the hands as well, the nails, palms, look at the face.
So when you look at the tongue, what does that tell you?
Well, the tongue is the only organ you can actually take out of the body, look at, and put back in without causing harm to the patient.
Okay. Yeah.
The tongue is semi-translucent, so you can actually see the quality of the blood. If the tongue, when they put the tongue out, if the tongue is a dark red and purple colour, you know the blood is sticky, what they call sticky or stagnant. And that's a major component to their condition. For instance, a lot of autoimmune conditions and cancers, the patient will have purpley tongue. And it means that they need herbs to invigorate their blood. Herbs like angelica, which I'm sure people know angelica in the culinary. Well, we call it dang gui.